There are hundreds of basic and alternate recipes in Satisfactory 1.0. Some of them are absolutely amazing, whilst others not so much. So I've made it my mission in Satisfactory to compare every single recipe in the game to inform you guys on what the best and worst recipes are. So welcome to the best recipes in Satisfactory 1.0 series. Today's video is all about circuit boards. There are 4 total recipes for this thing. So as usual, I've laid everything out, and we're gonna try and find the best recipe, starting with the basic circuit board recipe. And to make our 10 circuit boards per minute, which I'll be making for all 4 recipes, we need to consume 20 copper sheets and 40 plastic. Let's start off with the plastic, and if you've seen a few of my videos like this before, you know exactly where we're going to be going with this. To make our plastic, I'll be using this recipe here, which combines rubber and fuel. And for our fuel, I'm using something called diluted fuel, which is fantastic. It combines heavy oil residue and water. So rather than just turning your crude oil straight into fuel, if you do this, you'll end up saving a lot of crude oil and getting a lot more fuel for your crude oil consumption. Furthermore, we can actually make all of the heavy oil residue as a byproduct from our rubber that will then be used to make our fuel. So it doesn't actually end up consuming that much crude oil, which is fantastic. And the next step of this recipe is our 20 copper sheets. And there's 2 different ways of making this. This is the first and the easiest way, where to get your 20 copper sheets, you need 40 copper ingots. And of course, to get your 40 ingots, you need 40 ore. But you can actually save on some copper ore by doing a cheeky little tactic. And you know what that requires? The refinery. Yes, it is back. So to make the 20 copper sheets that we need, we now only need 20 copper ingots and 20 water per minute. This instantly saves us 20 copper ingots. We can also then see to make our 20 copper ingots, we only have to consume 9 copper ore and 5.3 water, which means that rather than consuming 40 copper ore, we are now only consuming 8. However, it does mean that we do have to use quite a lot of extra water here for this process, and if you don't want to use that extra water, then you can just go with this recipe. For anyone curious, this is what this recipe looks like drawn out. So it's not that difficult, you just need some extra water and less copper. So regarding resource consumption, the only thing we need is 40 copper ore, 30 crude oil, and 20 water per minute, which is relatively cheap for 10 circuit boards, which are used to make a lot of things. It's used to make high-speed connectors, computers, adaptive control units, radio control units, and some other stuff here as well as alt recipes. So you'll most likely end up consuming circuit boards at one point or another throughout your playthrough. However, let's have a quick look at the machines required. So we are going to need 1 blender, 1 water extractor, 2 assemblers, 2 smelters, 2 refineries, and 1 constructor. Not all of these machines will be fully overclocked, hence why our blender is only consuming 15 megawatts rather than 75. In total, everything here consumes 103 megawatts. Not too bad. However, is it the best recipe of the day? Well, let's find out now with recipe number 2. This is called electrode circuit boards, where we are going to need petroleum coke and rubber. And instantly you might notice something. The only resource really that we're consuming here is crude oil. You do have to use water if you choose to use this diluted fuel recipe, which again I very highly recommend as being one of the best recipes in the entirety of Satisfactory. However, other than that, it's just crude oil. So you could say this is the easiest recipe to make out of all the ones I'm showing you today. And to make this, you are going to need 40 rubber using the exact same thing that I showed you with our previous recipe. We're using crude oil to make our plastic. Then with our byproduct, which is the heavy oil residue, we then turn that into fuel when we combine it with water. Very, very simple stuff. Additionally, to make our 80 petroleum coke, we are going to need 27 heavy oil residue, which if you so wish, you can actually just turn into your polymer resin, and for 13.4 polymer resin, you can't really make too much. It's the equivalent of about 4.5 plastic per minute, so yeah, not a great deal there at all. And to make the heavy oil residue, that only requires 20 crude oil. So in total, you are consuming 50 crude oil and 20 water per minute just to make the 10 circuit boards. Nothing else. Machine-wise, this is as simple as it gets. 1 blender, 1 water extractor, 4 refineries, consuming 108 megawatts worth of power. Just very quickly, if you enjoy videos like this and you want more guides, tips and tricks, then feel free to subscribe if you wish. You don't have to, but it's a good way to support the channel. You'll also get notified whenever I drop one of these videos. Thank you for all the continued support on the channel, but without further ado, let's get straight back into the video. So far, you've seen the basic circuit board recipe and the electrode circuit board recipe. However, our third recipe of the day is a complete polar opposite to what I just showed you last time, because we were consuming a bunch of crude oil last time, but now we are consuming 0 crude oil, and this is the only recipe on the list that does so. Regardless, let's talk about this recipe a little bit more. We are consuming 20 copper sheets, which is the exact same recipe I've showed you in our first basic recipe, and we're also consuming 22 silica, which does require raw quartz. Other than that, it's literally it. Like, that is all you have to do for this. No rubber, no plastic, no water, literally nothing. Of course, you can add water here if you so wish to make your copper sheets. But if you just want to stick with the bare bones of it, that is all you need. Resource or machine consumption wise, should I say, you need 1 assembler, 2 smelters, and 4 constructors, consuming just 29 megawatts. The last 2 recipes were both in the hundreds, and this is just 29, which is amazing. And again, resource consumption down here, 13.2 raw quartz and 44 copper ore. I absolutely love this recipe, and I can say it's good, but I'll give more of my opinions towards the end of the video, because we've still got one more recipe to go, and this looks really confusing, but don't worry, it's very simple. That is our Caterium circuit board recipe. This thing consumes 2 things, quick wire and plastic. You guys know what I'm about to say here with the plastic. Crude oil, water, that's essentially it. You make the heavy oil residue as a byproduct from your rubber, add it back into here. You actually get left over with some extra heavy oil residue as well, but you don't really have enough to actually make anything else from it of value. But you still get a bit extra, which you can always use to your advantage if you so wish. And that's to create 14.3 plastic, which is not too much. Something else that you need is quick wire, and you don't necessarily have to use this recipe, although this is my favorite quick wire recipe to use. It uses copper, so you use less Caterium, which means that you can use Caterium for other projects, or just more quick wire, which is fantastic. But there's another recipe that you can use instead, and that's something a little bit like this that I was using in my previous stator recipe. And for this, you just have to consume Caterium ingots. You don't have to consume copper ingots if you don't want to. However, it will end up consuming more Caterium, so do that if you want. And of course, you don't actually have to use water for this recipe either, but again, the amount of Caterium ore will increase. I have chosen this recipe to save in Caterium. Other than that though, that's essentially it. Unfortunately, you do have to consume a little bit of Caterium, copper, crude oil, and water, but let's just have a quick look at these actual resources. 7.2 Caterium is nothing, 7.2 copper ore, nothing at all. 11 crude oil is the lowest amount we've had so far, other than our previous recipe, which of course consumed 0. And 19.2 water, again, is very, very little. This of course has a pretty big effect regarding our power consumption, where we only have to consume 1 blender, 1 water extractor, 3 assemblers, and 4 refineries. Pretty much none of which, other than I think maybe 1 refinery, being consumed at 100% efficiency, meaning we only consume 56 megawatts. How does this compare to our previous recipes? Well, let's take a quick look. Starting with our basic recipe, we consume the second most amount of copper, other than the silicon recipe. We also consume the second most amount of crude oil, other than our second recipe, and we consume water as well. The second electrode recipe just consumes crude oil, so it makes it nice and easy in regards to that. Our third recipe doesn't consume any crude oil at all, so if you're trying to save on crude oil to be used for other projects like power, for example, or other plastic and rubber, then this recipe could be perfect for you. Also, if you don't want to add any water into this, you don't have to use any refineries. Not to mention, it saves you a lot of power, especially in comparison to these first 2 recipes. Lastly, we've got the Caterium circuit board, which does consume the most amount of items, but the least amount of resources, if that makes sense. Like, only 7.2 Caterium, not that much at all. So what is the best recipe? Well, as you might have guessed, I do love the silicon circuit board. However, I must give a special shout out though to the electrode circuit board, since again, it just consumes crude oil, which makes the logistic and the planning part of things really simple. For example, you don't have to worry about belting your Caterium in, and your copper, and your crude oil, and then worrying about crude oil if you've not built it next to, let's say, a crude oil node. How are you going to transport it? Is it by a liquid or by a solid? How are you going to package it? You're going to transport it by train. All these things that can get rather annoying, same here with water. Whereas with this recipe, you just build it near a crude oil node or near water and there you go, you've got no problems there whatsoever. Take these western beaches as an example. This area is extremely flat, it's got tons of water and a really good amount of crude oil here as well. If you just build your plant out there, and there you go, you've essentially got an infinite amount of circuit boards from this thing. It is really, really good. But essentially, choose the recipe that is best for you. Like I previously stated, do you not want to use crude oil? Use this. Do you just want to use crude oil? Use that. These other two recipes are both okay, but I wouldn't use them when I can just use these two instead. I hope you guys found this video nice and helpful. So without further ado, thank you very much for watching and a happy new year. Before we go, a massive shout out to the Knights of the Realm channel members. We have Asuna Yuki, Variance, Natormal, Yamikel Burns, Chaos Rising, Scotland Hattie, and Mau Mau. If you decide to become a Knight of the Realm for just £2.99 a month, you get access to channel-only emotes, unique badges, and also shoutouts in videos. Memberships are the best way to support my channel, but you don't have to become a member. Even just by watching today's video, you are supporting the channel massively. Here's a couple more videos I've made that you might be interested in. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Have an amazing rest of your day, and remember, Godspeed.